So this past semester, no, get food. I don't mind at all. Please get food. This past semester I was in Shanghai. I was at Fudan University, and I was interning at a think tank called the Pudong Institute for the U.S. Economy, or Pudong Meigo Trinity Junction. Yeah, I didn't remember that. And for about a month and a half, I did nothing. I got no tasks or anything. And about maybe mid-April, end of April, the guy who I was under, tells me, hey, we've been commissioned by the Shanghai government to write reports about the Expo. Okay, what about? About the foreign experience of the Expo. Okay, and? That was the extent of the direction. And I said, well, I'm interested in Latin America and China. Why don't we do interviews, focusing on Latin America, and we'll just go from there. And so what ended up happening, we go to the Expo. I call up a friend of mine who's in the program, said, hey, we're here. She had a connection with the Bolivian Pavilion. And we ended up getting an interview with their Commissioner General. And then, basically through my awful Spanglish and my decent Mandarin, I ended up securing interviews and conducting interviews with the Commissioner Generals of Brazil, Mexico, Panama, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Argentina. Basically just all about their experience at the Expo, their thoughts on Sino-Latin relations, and so on and so forth. Common difficulties that all of the pavilions were having, basically all of them, were having through language barriers, a lack of English. This is especially troublesome for Mexico, because a lot of their people were complaining that a lot of them didn't necessarily speak that good of English or English at all. So nothing's in Spanish. There are signs and such that aren't even in English, so a lot of barriers with that. There were no official standards or procedures at the Expo. Everything could just change like that. Almost to the point of like, oh, Canada, we're moving your pavilion from here to over there, and Uganda, you're over here. Like, literally just, to that point. Constantly in a state of flux. Also, long-term delay of securing goods from customs. Basically, it would be like, you'd have to call for a month. And like, I know my goods are in customs. I've seen the order form. Where are they? And they're like, oh no, they're not in. And after a month, they'll be like, oh, you mean those goods? Why don't you just say them? So they can rack up greater, tariffs on it. Transportation routes in Shanghai and in the Expo, great inconsistency with that. Credentials often had errors. They weren't provided to the right people, weren't provided at all, or didn't have the proper title. There's also a disconnect between the Chinese visitors and Latin American pavilions. That was the general feeling of the Commissioner General, is that most Chinese were kind of seeing Latin Americans for the first time. It was almost kind of more like going to the zoo, for the average Chinese person. And the Latin American sector was not the primary destination. They often felt it was a secondary or tertiary focus. So just very quickly, I want to put your attention to this. This is just competition with Chinese trade in Latin America. And if you look at very low overlap and low trade, you have Venezuela, you have Chile, you have Peru. And then really high up, we got Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia are kind of in the middle. And Panama is down towards the bottom. Okay, that's going to be relevant in just a second. Also looking at Chinese trade competition. Up here with large increases, we have Mexico, we have El Salvador, Guatemala, Brazil and Colombia again in the middle, and Bolivia and Peru, significantly decreasing. Now, I'm only going to talk about a few of the pavilions, ones I thought were most interesting. Mexican goals of the Expo were to provide a cultural exposition to show Mayan history, Mayan culture, and also shared ancestry way back when in terms of Pangea with China. Also to show daily life in Mexico with the goal of this not just being about, well, this is what Carlos Slim lives like, and that's the only person in Mexico. But they had these great little masks you could look into, and they recorded videos of just kind of daily life in Mexico. They wanted to show also the very vibrant religious identity of Mexico, particularly Catholicism, improve greater economic linkages, and greater cooperation and ease of commerce between the two countries. One of Mexico's main complaints, and a lot of countries feel this way, is it's very easy for the Chinese to do business in Latin America, but vice versa. There's a lot of barriers, and it's very difficult. It's not exactly the most reciprocal relationship. If you can kind of make it out, you see some stuff in italics, and that's basically looking at specialization index of China and Mexico, and where the primary overlaps are. That's miscellaneous manufacturing, clothing, electrical components, IT and consumer electronics. So also there's a lot of competition in foreign direct investment with China and Mexico. China currently is the #1 global destination for foreign direct investment. Mexico has enjoyed good foreign direct investment, but it's been declining. From 2001 to 2003, it went from 27 billion US dollars to $11 billion. And then in 2003, there was a 30% annual decrease in global FDI in Mexico. Not good for Mexico given how much poverty there is and how much social instability, and we all read the news, we all know the myriad of problems. Chinese and Mexican trade competition. Mexico's largest export market is the United States, and in 2005, the U.S. bought 85% of Mexican exports. But by 2003, China's U.S. market share was 12.1%, and that was greater than the market share of the United States, of Mexico in the United States. So there's very high Chinese and Mexican competition, and I'm going to get to why in just a second. This is pretty self-explanatory. I think I really need to explain that. So where we have specialization overlap in these two countries, infotech, consumer electronics, electronic components, clothing, transport electronics, electronic components, and miscellaneous manufactured goods. What's the future and what's the main issue with Mexico and China? Well, China has the comparative advantage in production costs, kind of the main driver of capitalism. And what that does, much to the chagrin of states in Mexico and Canada and the United States, is it underscores the benefits of NAFTA in terms of, NAFTA was supposed to be like great, production costs are so low in Mexico, there's proximity, and really, if Mexico wants to stay relevant, they need to, one, reform NAFTA, and also needs to make sure that Mexico is focusing on time-sensitive sectors, so that's the exports that it matters that they get in there into the market within the shortest period of time, because they cannot make it cheaper than China. They've lost that comparative advantage. This is what they need to focus on. Okay. Next country, Panama. Now, Panama is typically not a country you necessarily think of as a main driver in this. In my opinion, it's incredibly relevant. It's the main Chinese linkage is through the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal expansion project is hugely favored by China because it's going to increase the capacity of passing large boats. That's a Chinese freighter. That's the Panama Canal. Doesn't exactly match up best. Chinese boats are predominantly quite large, and this will allow greater Chinese access to the eastern seaboard, the United States, and Latin America. China is the second largest user of the Panama Canal, and 14 to 15% of maritime shipping passes through it from China. So this will just, Mexico should take note, especially, Mexico's whole thing is they need to take care of time-sensitive sectors. This is worrisome for them. Okay. Expo will be the first encounter with Panama for many. Wanted to promote their natural and human diversity, international history, beautiful beaches, and the much increase in economic potential. And also low levels of trade competition with China, because their primary linkage is the Panama Canal and simply holding the door open for China and knocking down some walls so, China kind of having fattened up can make it through. Okay, moving to Peru. This is the first independent pavilion at a World Expo Peru has had. And they've always been part of joint pavilions. The Central American pavilion was 26 tiny pavilions, including Ecuador, Panama, Nicaragua, and a few others. And Bolivia was the leader of that. So Peru, this is the first time they've kind of broken with that and really asserted themselves. So they want to show their global strength and economic strength. And also low level of competition with China. Both countries enjoy very rich cultural and diplomatic linkages. There's over 160 years of Sino-Peruvian diplomatic relations, and the largest Chinese population in Latin America resides in Peru. There's shared cultural history underlies and supports the commercial relationships. Furthermore, there's a lot of trade agreements. On April 28, 2009, there was the new Peru-China Free Trade Agreement. On March 1st, the entry into force, so it took effect. And China is the major destination for Peruvian exports, and this previous year, trade amounted to US $8 billion. It's a strategic relationship for both powers because the Pacific Ocean facilitates Chinese imports and exports. It's a stable legal and political system. Very valuable in doing trade with Latin America. Incredibly valuable. 8 years of steady economic growth, and it has the resources to afford a multitude of business opportunities. It's not stuck in one specific sector. Also, both countries are in the G8, so that allows them another forum to connect